How did being well in academia come about?
So I wrote Being Well in Academia on the back of another book, actually. The first book was called The Research Companion. And that came about because I was doing lots and lots of training in colleges, universities, and with charities about safety. So, safety and well-being of researchers, and primarily field work, actually. But every time I did a session in a university about fieldwork, somebody, often more than one person actually, would either say in the session or afterwards take me to one side and say, I'm struggling here. So it was usually bullying. And they would detail things around sort of homophobia or racism, sexism, ableism, classism, all of those things often, um, that they felt they couldn't escape from. And so over time, I think that the sort of interest in research has changed, or the interest in safety in research has changed, that we're much better at understanding that it's not just a sort of a danger out there with sort of subjects that are considered to be dangerous. So there's often topics that people think are very dangerous, and then things that they wrongly think are safe. And I think there can be risks inside universities and outside. And at the same time, we've become, I think, more vocal and much more aware, and probably the pandemic has made this more acute, of the problems within universities. So the whole competition, precarity, the sense of instability, very toxic working places, the idea that you're set up to succeed, as in people are given these ideas that you get a PhD and you postdoc and get into an academic job and then you're set for life, and then discovering that's not true. And I think these sort of real repercussions that come with that, and pain and distress, and just generally, I think, either trying to do research, particularly at the moment when it's so interrupted, or trying to support colleagues and students. It's a really difficult time. And so Being Well in Academia really came about in terms of a guidebook that was I guess I wrote it because I thought about either myself in the past, when I've been struggling, or students I've supported who are not particularly well cared for within wherever they're studying or working, that you could have a book that you could look at, and it's not going to have all the answers, but it's going to make you feel a bit better, and you would know from that maybe where you could go to next to ask for help.
What is the aim of the book?
Actually, I'm very nervous, and suspicious of any kind of self-help book that promises to change your life. I think anything that's suggesting that it can overhaul and transform stuff is not likely. One person, I can't change it on my own. I'd like to, but I can't. So there's a sort of tradition with advice giving. I mean, as well as an academic, I'm an agony aunt, so I come from a sort of tradition of giving advice in media, of this idea that was coined by the agony aunt Anna Rabin, which is this one step further than where you found me. So if I can get people to read this and think, well, I'm not on my own, I recognise there are ways I can help myself, but I also see that there's somewhere else I could get help if I need it. And that might be on campus, it might be off campus, it might be with a charity, it might be with a GP, it could be all sorts of places. But if I know I can go there, then I'm a little bit further on. And if enough of us can start doing that and then network together. So I've designed it to be more like a conversation. It says quite clearly throughout it, it's not just a static book. I'm sure people will read it and think, well, why didn't you include this resource or that idea? Well, that's great. If you've got them, tell me and I will share more of them. So I hope it will be a conversation. I hope it will add to what's already going on. I think I'd like it to supplement and enhance what lots of organisations are already doing, the unions are doing, that academics are doing, that students are doing, and also staff within universities. So that might be management staff, it might be admin, it might be people working in catering or cleaning or all sorts of services around the university, that they are also included. Because I think very often, if we have conversations about it, it tends to really only focus on a small group of academics. It's very much catered towards STEM. It's very much catered towards America. It's very much catered towards people who've got problems, but they are primarily solvable ones. They might be feeling very stressed and unhappy, but for example, they might still have tenure. I'm interested in going way beyond that to people who are perhaps on contract work, who are precarious, who are first generation students, who are part-time students, maybe they are carers or parents. A lot of them might work being for contract, so they are, particularly for cleaning, catering staff, they aren't going to necessarily be employed directly by an organisation. So how do we have a holistic view of our well-being that accommodates very diverse needs, not just in one country? I've tried to write it, although it's in English, to many countries. So the idea is almost you impose your own setting upon it. There's a structure there and a scaffold, and it will say, you could try these things, but I'm not assuming they will work necessarily for you.
How did your experience as an agony aunt influence the writing of the book?
So for example, when you're doing advice giving in media, it's usually limited. So for example, if it's a column in a newspaper, it might only be a couple of hundred words, maximum maybe 1,000 words if you're really lucky. If you're doing something on radio, lots of people are ringing in with problems. So you've only got a short time to talk to the person and then give them maybe some information, and on they go. And so I think that tradition helped a bit when I was writing it, in that it's in sort of blocks. And I think that's also useful because, as you say, if you're really struggling or you're in crisis, or neurodivergent readers particularly, anyone working in a second language, and also I think if you're just overwhelmed, as most of us are at the moment, if you could just sit down and read a bit and then come back to it, and it will still be there, and it will just roll on. And also, I didn't deliberately do this, but I'm pretending I did, is that you can start it from the beginning or from the end, and it doesn't particularly matter. So if you start it from the beginning, it kind of guides you through all the things that are happening in academia and then how you can help yourself. If you start it at the end, it's sort of all the feel-good stuff that you can do to sort of self-care and then go back. And some people have a real preference for the sort of looking after yourself and the self-care tips and ideas. And some people don't like that, actually. They feel it's simplistic. So I thought, well, if I start it at both ends, then I'll hopefully keep everybody a bit happy. Yeah.
How does the book speak in the current pandemic?
The easy thing is to be a bit of a guru and write, this is my guide to life, and isn't it amazing? And I think actually people do quite like that. It's very engaging. It's quite you can be very drawn to the promise that everything can be solved, but of course when you try it in reality it doesn't work, and then people rightfully get annoyed. So I wrote it all prior to the pandemic, and then I was editing it as the pandemic was happening. I think we'd gone into lockdown as I was doing the last lot of edits. And I think I was relieved that it held up, because it would have been terrible to have written this and then thought, oh my gosh, I've got to completely revise it. But I think there are some issues that have shifted, and I think one of those is that we've moved into this. I mean, we were already in a period of huge inequality, and it's just every day it's getting wider. So the people who are already struggling are struggling more. The inequalities are widening. There's lots of problems, I think, around the rise of the far right and targeting of students and staff. And at the same time, services are closing. Face-to-face services are closing. Online services are closing. A lot of charities are shutting because they can't afford to stay open. There are support systems on campus, but also a lot of staff, I think, are having to learn incredibly rapidly lots of new skills. I mean, the fact that we're doing this now, it's all very, very new to a lot of people. So the ability to have patience and to be kind and to be calm and to not just have your own problems to deal with, but the willingness to deal with other people's, understandably, has all shifted. And I don't think it's that people don't care. I think they are just so overwhelmed. And we still have very poor management, really bad decisions being made, people being pushed into dangerous situations in terms of all sorts of working practices, but infection as well. And I again, I don't have one solution to it, but I do think that there's a lot in the book that I think helps people, if they are in the middle of a crisis, to just calm and sit there and have somebody saying to you, okay, it's all right. It's not perfect at the moment, but we're in the middle of a pandemic and we can't expect to be perfect. This is not the time to be productive or rush ahead or push other people to do the same. If you're doing fantastically, well, that's wonderful, but Most people aren't. So here is a resource. Instead of you having to start from scratch, here is a resource that will get you a little bit further on.